The Square is a 2017 Swedish film that won the Palme d'Or last year and is also nominated for the Best Foreign Film at the Oscars. And it is directed by Ruben Östlund, who directed a fantastic little movie a couple of years back called Force Majeure. It stars Claes, I think that's how you pronounce it, Elisabeth Moss, Dominic West, who has a small role, and a guy called Terry Notary, who I'd never heard of, but is basically the guy who acts like a gorilla in all the promos and is on the poster. The synopsis of this film is that there's basically a museum curator who's trying to drum up some excitement for a new exhibition that's coming up, and this new piece entitled The Square is actually just this square, these lines that are painted or mounted on the ground. And whenever a client or whenever a passerby walks into that square, he has to sort of be a better human being. He is obligated to help people out and to just be a better person. So, you know, obviously it's a pretty crappy and vapid piece of art, and that's kind of the point. The film takes great pleasure in poking fun at contemporary art. And that's really one of the main problems with the film, is that it's such a trope, it's such an easy target. I mean, everything in pop culture up to this point has, made fun of contemporary art and the state of art as it is today. It's really not that original, it's really not that groundbreaking, and it really just is a very easy talking point that not a lot of people are going to disagree with.
This is the first piece I noticed. What impressed me is the absolute depth of it. 2 bracelets sitting on a counter, filmed in VHS? Breathtaking. This piece is entitled, I Really Don't Give a Shit, and it shows. It sold for $2 million, which definitely left me feeling quite stupid and confused. What specifically did I learn from this piece? Looking old increases the value of art.
Bon, on y va? Ça fait 1 heure que vous êtes scotché, là. Faut changer de chaîne à un moment, là.
Beaucoup de sérénité qui se dégage de ce tableau. Et même une certaine violence.
Je trouve très touchant aussi.
C'est touchant des taches rouges sur un fond blanc? Mais ça coûte combien, ça?
Je crois qu'il est à 30 000 €. Mais je peux vérifier si vous voulez.
Ouais, vaut mieux vérifier quand même. Parce que ça me paraît exagéré comme prix. Vous allez pas acheter cette croûte-là 30 000 €? C'est pas possible, ça.
Ah bah si, c'est possible.
Mais le mec, il a saigné du nez sur un fond blanc, il demande 30 000 €.
Your ship is filthy.
Oh, she has no idea. If I had a black light, the place would look like a Jackson Pollock painting.
It's really just shooting fish in a barrel at this point, and it feels extremely disingenuous and sort of dishonest. Do I think the art in this film is garbage? Yeah, I think the art that is presented in this film that is being made fun of is trash. But then again, I think 90% of contemporary art is trash because everything is trash. Like 90% of movies are garbage, 90% of music is trash, 90% of books are awful. Good things are extremely rare, and yeah, that's why we cherish them. If everything were great, then it wouldn't be that special. No, great things are very rare, and contemporary art is no exception to this. And so obviously by taking some potshots at art and the museum world, you're also really making fun and satirizing people that are in and around that world, the upper middle class, the upper class people that surround the art world. They're portrayed as self-serving, egotistical assholes who present themselves and pretend like they're a lot smarter and a lot more cultured and a lot more generous than they really are. So there's a real dichotomy here between the what's being presented and the piece that is at the center of this film, which is about humanity, which is about helping people, and the reality in which this bourgeois elite is in reality extremely selfish and not concerned at all about the lives of others. And this is shown in a very unsubtle way. I mean, it's very clear about its message. There's a lot of shots of homeless people within the streets of Stockholm. There's a lot of people actually calling out for help that are in need of that are in desperate need of help and yet never receiving any of that help. I'm sort of ambivalent on how I feel about this aspect. On the one hand, it's sort of trying to have its cake and eat it too, much like The Killing of a Sacred Deer, which was both poking fun at that upper class, very wealthy elite. It's also aimed at those people. It's also a film that is a Cannes selected big festival film that's, nominated for Oscars. And a lot of people that watch this film or that see this film would consider it as pretentious and as trite as the art that is being mocked in this film. And on the other hand, I can really respect a film that just, goes to a big film festival and is basically pointing right at the audience and saying you're a bunch of selfish cunts and you're pieces of shit. I really can admire that, but I just wish it really leaned into that a little bit more. I wish it would go full satire. I wish it were more aggressive, like some of the Italian films in the 1970s. Things like Ugly, Dirty and Mean, Good Night, Ladies and Gentlemen, or I Nuovo Monstri, just these films that were absolutely savage, and they weren't subtle, and they were very bullish and very mean, but they were sort of delightful, and they really owned their subject matter. The film as it is just unfortunately pretty dull. To add to my problems with the film, it's unfortunately it's way too long. There's this really long subplot about how the main actor gets his phone and his wallet stolen, and he tries to get it back, so he tracks his phone on this app that he has on his computer, and he goes to the building, and he's afraid to go because it's a poor project housing place in Stockholm. And, the whole point of that is so that by the end of the film, he understands that these people, they're not as dangerous as they seem. And he understands that although he maybe as a member of this upper class, wealthy, well-meaning, leftist sort of personality, that he sort of champions these people, but he knows nothing about them. He lives in such a different world, in a different universe, that he can sort of promote an ideology that is all about inclusivity and helping others, and yet doesn't really live by those rules. And by the end of the film, he understands his sort of hypocrisy. And if the film were solely about that, it would be a stronger film, actually. I think that's where the film taps into some of its more interesting ideology, but it's still very basic and very obvious and really not all that engaging. To add to that, there's a ton of scenes that feel not out of place, but they feel like these little vignettes that are thematically resonant, but don't serve to advance the characters or the plot forward. They feel like they're little short stories that have been added because they fit within the themes of the film. But they really do nothing for me. They really stand out. Some of them are taken on their own, maybe if they were really made into a short film, and if they were made to exist solely on their own, could maybe work, like the gorilla scene or whatever. But as is, it really just adds almost an hour to the film that's 2.5 hours long. And I really feel that if you had excised all of that from the square, it would be a much stronger film, and I would come out of it with far less negatives than I do as of now. The way I see it, it sort of feels as if Östlund is just artificially padding out the length of his film so it feels important, it feels grandiose, it feels like you're watching an Oscar-nominated, Palme d'Or-winning film. But unfortunately, I think that grandiosity, that it works against the film in the end. Brevity is the soul of wit, as good old Bill would say, and to that I'd like to add that modesty is a wonderful quality. I praise Lady Bird for how Greta Gerwig knew what to cut out of the film, knew how to pace her film, knew that she was making a small, modest, very nice little film, but not something grandiose and heavy that needed 4 hours. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of modesty in this film. It's trying very hard to feel important. And this is really something that his previous film, Force Majeure, understood in a far better way. It really just tackled one theme and did so very intelligently and in a very interesting manner. And The Square clearly has an affiliation with his previous film, and it shares quite a lot of themes, Of the two films that I've seen by this director, it seems that he's extremely concerned by the sort of decline in masculinity, or at least the state of masculinity in his homeland of Sweden. At least the upper middle class and the middle class men in his films are just portrayed as wusses, for lack of a better word.
No, you're not a man. You're the fake image of one. You don't build anything. You're not even alive. Your women and children don't belong to you. They belong to the globalists who conquered you.
It's not so much in this idea that, real men, they go out in the woods and chop a tree and, kill an animal and eat its liver raw. It's more in what they do in terms of their familial and social structure. In Force Majeure, you have the main father figure who, when the avalanche comes and is endangering the lives of himself and his family, just runs for his life and is solely concerned about his own well-being and not the safety of his children and his wife. In The Square, Claes Bang's character is, like I said, very much afraid of going into the project and meeting up with the lower class, probably immigrant population of Stockholm. And throughout the film, there's two instances of violence, or at least threat of violence towards women, and the men are very, very slow and not very courageous in the way they intervene, and only intervene when they can sort of overtake the situation and come out on top. So they're really just weak, selfish, little bitches, really. But in Force Majeure, the relationship between men and women was handled in a much more interesting and much more subtle way. I mean, you really feel for the wife figure. I forget her name, unfortunately, but how does she go about resuming a normal relationship? How does she go about resuming the relationship that she has with her husband when he essentially just ran out on them at the first threat of danger? That's just such an interesting and fascinating sort of little situation to put your character in. But in The Square, female characters are just thrown by the wayside. I mean, Elisabeth Moss is absolutely useless in the entirety of the film, and not only that, but she's extremely just needy and bitchy and annoying, and it just doesn't serve any purpose, and it really is a really just annoying female figure that is so cliche that we've seen in so many films that really doesn't bring anything to the movie or to male-female relationships in any way. The only thing that's interesting about her is that she has a pet chimpanzee, and that's never explained within the film. Like, all of a sudden, there's a fucking chimp, and there's a fucking chimp. And so, unfortunately, the film really is too didactic and demonstrative to come away with it feeling anything other than tedium. I mean, it's not doing anything more than just shoving its themes down your throat that aren't all that interesting, that aren't all that novel, that aren't all that well treated. And it ends up just feeling as pretentious, as trite, and as overbloated as the modern art that it's making fun of. So, thank you very much for watching this video. As always, if you enjoy these, hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. And to all the subscribers out there and the people that are watching this, thank you very much. And we'll see you next time. The next movie that I will be covering is Michael Haneke's Happy End. And that'll be coming quite shortly.
Question all your selflessness, your little bouts of loneliness. Don't they eat you up inside? I fly when I fly.